So, what are Iran, the United States, and the dying Khamenei up to again? Khamenei is dead, confirmed Trump and Iranian state media. Ladies and gentlemen, it's here. He's dead. The supreme leader of the Islamic, theocratic, fanatical state of Iran is dead. And what happens next? We'll try to estimate that today. We'll also talk about how the strikes and attacks are currently unfolding, and we'll discuss why this might not be a completely 100% positive development. Because people are overly optimistic. Even in Iran, people are overly optimistic. And I'm afraid that today I'll have to dampen your mood a little. However, let's start with the fact that Khamenei is dead. Sure, it can't be completely confirmed because we don't have any evidence of the new outcome. Even if Iran said that Khamenei is dead, it doesn't necessarily mean that Khamenei is dead. It could simply mean that they wanted to create a martyr and actually wanted to hide him. But information is already leaking that a new Ayatollah has been chosen, so yes, Khamenei is probably really dead. As for his killing, of course, it's something that some people in Iran are celebrating. You could say that probably most people in Iran are celebrating Khamenei's death, but there are also millions of people who are truly saddened by his death. Because let's not misunderstand Iran. Iran was a very Muslim, very Islamic country even before the Islamic Revolution. The Islamic Revolution didn't just happen overnight. Sure, many of you have probably seen those pictures from Tehran where there were girls in miniskirts and bikinis and so on. That's definitely true. Such places really did exist in Iran before '79, especially in the big cities. But even under the Shah's rule, Islam and Islamism were very, very significant and very, very common phenomena. And the countryside or smaller towns definitely didn't look like Tehran in those photos that we all know. So it's important to realize that in that country there really is a large number of, let's say, poor people, poor maybe in terms of education, poor materially, who are truly very, very deeply spiritual, very, let's say, extremely conservative and orthodox Islamists and Muslims. And for these people, of course, any kind of liberalization, any change towards being more Western and being more like Europeans, for example, is obviously a terrible thing because it goes against Sharia law and the Islamic code and all of their conservative and pseudo-conservative beliefs which they follow and which are shaped by their low level of education, their extreme conservatism, their real fear of God's wrath, and simply put, their fanaticism. All of this is present in Iran. And therefore, for those people who are celebrating, at this moment, the Americans did a great thing by killing Khamenei. Maybe it's because in their euphoria, they can't see the future yet. But for those who are not celebrating, the Americans have created a martyr they will fight for. A martyr for whom those Islamic and truly poor and faithful people will be willing to mourn and maybe even raise the banner and take up arms. So this is important. It's important to realize that the fact that the Americans and Israelis killed Khamenei doesn't mean they've brought success to the faces of all Iranians. They've brought success to the faces of the more liberal Iranians, the more educated ones, those in bigger cities, but they've pissed off people in smaller towns, in villages, and so on. This is definitely true, and it's definitely a problem that could lead to further complications in the future because, as I've said several times, he's a martyr. He's an Islamic Ayatollah murdered by Christians and Jews, right? That's a big deal. So that's how it is. Besides that, it's important to realize one thing, and that is that this old Ayatollah didn't have that much power in Iran anymore. So by killing him, you didn't really gain much. You gained a certain symbolic victory, but on a practical level, on the level of pragmatism, you didn't gain that much. And on the contrary, as we said, you created a martyr. In reality, in Iran lately, power has mainly been held by the Revolutionary Guards and people connected to them, or by younger and more capable spiritual leaders. This is something that will be very important in the future because when this war ends, it will have to lead to something. For now, the war continues. For now, It goes on. For example, Dubai was hit by Iranian missiles, and overall, Iran is trying to make sure the whole surrounding area is more or less affected to cause damage so that when the taste, or rather the aftertaste of victory and the removal of Iran fades, people will say that it was actually the Americans who caused all this, that Iran was mainly defending itself, and so that after some kind of victory, which will probably come, there will simply remain a certain bitterness, like if we hadn't attacked, our skyscrapers in Abu Dhabi wouldn't have been damaged, our bases in the Persian Gulf wouldn't have been hit by Iranian missiles, our soldiers wouldn't have been wounded, our people wouldn't have died, and all these things. Besides that, the Iranian regime would certainly like to make things as difficult as possible for the Americans and the Israelis, in the sense that they will hold out as long as possible, that they will flood the internet with as many reports as possible about how the Americans hit a girls' school, how the Americans hit a kitten shelter, how the Americans did other terrible things. So yes, we can expect that besides pictures of celebrating Iranians, we'll also see pictures of angry Iranians. We'll see reports about how the Americans are killing children with bombs that land nearby. We'll see a lot of propaganda, and at the same time, we'll see a lot of disgusting actions where some of you will be thinking maybe after a week, when the war has been going on for a week or two, you'll be asking yourselves, was it worth it? What Iran is doing now, all of this was caused by the Americans. Yeah, right now there's still a certain euphoria, a certain feeling of triumph, but as time goes on and this continues, we'll become more and more disgusted. It'll leave an even more bitter taste in our mouths, and already more information is coming out that can make it even more bitter for us, like the fact that hours before the strike on Iran, it looked like there was going to be progress, then Trump sent in the bombs. That's another thing that makes this whole situation even more bitter, that instead of negotiating, so they started bombing, and some media will flood the space saying that the negotiations were going well, so Trump attacked completely senselessly, and so on and so forth. So all of this leaves a bitter taste in our mouths, ruining the feeling of victory even before the next results come in. Because be aware that killing Khamenei is just a small part of it. Overall, defeating Iran will actually be just a small part. That's the easy part. Defeating Iran militarily will be the easy part. The much harder part will be the next phase. The nation-building part, which we know the United States is more or less not very good at. This nation-building part can actually turn out in 3 different ways that are likely. You can immediately rule out the arrival of any liberal or any kind of democracy. That's more or less impossible in Iran. I've heard people say that even in Czechoslovakia in 1989, communism fell. And if we had this mentality that you shouldn't change what's established, it could cause some crime and so on, then we would still have some kind of dictatorship or something like that. But that's not the same case. First of all, we Czechs had experience with democracy. We had experience with democracy. We had experience with some kind of parliamentary representation. That's from Austria-Hungary's era, when there was partial democracy and some representation in Vienna, including parliaments and similar institutions. I'm saying clearly it wasn't a fully fledged democracy, but it was a kind of partial democracy. During the First Republic, there was democracy, yes. Then there wasn't democracy, there was some form of totalitarianism here, Nazi occupation, communist totalitarianism, but then it came back again. Besides, when it came back, it was after a period of decline. The communist apparatchiks themselves actually stayed in the system, they kept running it, voluntarily in a way, or voluntarily in a certain cooperation with the dissent. Faced with the unsustainability of the system, they cooperated. And in fact, in the end, power here was taken over by people who were very, very closely connected to the regime, like Milos Zeman, Václav Klaus, people from the Prognostic Institute, who were not exactly boiler room workers. They weren't really people from some other spectrum. They were simply people who were part of certain intellectual elites or some offices, etc. And these were the ones who came to power. Plus, of course, actors started doing it too. So they were also elites even before the fall of the regime. So they were elites. After the fall of the regime, the elites remained. Yeah, and besides that, there were some dissidents like Václav Havel who became president, but more or less the transition from communism to democracy was mainly handled by people who were already functioning within the structures of the old regime, plus quite a few dissidents were involved as well. But it was more of a cooperation. It wasn't like you bomb out the old guard and bring in a new one. So, as I said, you can forget about liberal democracy or any kind of democracy in Iran because, unlike us, in Iran, there is no functioning organized opposition with any real weight. And besides that, there is no democratic tradition or anything like that. Therefore, the development might be more along the following lines. First, the first point, despite all the bombing and pressure, the theocratic dictatorship will remain in power, but it will be a theocratic dictatorship that cooperates with the world, with the United States, so things like Sharia law and all that crap will stay there. It will be like Saudi Arabia 2.0, but of course in some way it will be a different form, but it will be similar. It will be a very totalitarian, very autocratic form with very strict Islamic laws, but it will side with the United States. They will extract oil, they won't develop nuclear bombs, and they'll be buddies. But people will still be oppressed in the same way. There won't be human rights, rights for women, none of that will be there. They'll just be buddies, geopolitical buddies, against, as far as I know, the Taliban or something like that. Well, that's one of the possibilities. The second possibility, which is very unpleasant, is the country falling into civil war. Iran is culturally and ethnically very diverse. There are separatist regions, so with such massive bombing, when the regime collapses and one part of Iran mourns the martyr Ayatollah and the other part of Iran celebrates the death of the Ayatollah, it can happen that the country will be so divided in its opinion about the Americans and the whole operation that it will lead to civil war. A country torn apart by civil war with pro-American and anti-American factions against each other, plus separatist Kurds, plus support coming from Pakistan and Afghanistan, and certainly Turkey would also get involved, and so on. Such a country would be perfect. Perfect and stable for any terrorist organization that would want to grow and thrive there. The main reason it would be great is that Iran has a lot of nuclear materials, whether it's weapons grade, which is supposedly there, otherwise they wouldn't be bombing Iran at all, or regular uranium or spent fuel, because there are nuclear reactors in Iran. So, terrorist organizations and an active civil war in a country with nuclear power plants, spent fuel, and possibly even weapons-grade uranium, that's not exactly great, especially in this part of the world where anyone like a Taliban member could just come in and pick it up in a bag. So, yeah, that's another scenario that could happen, and it looks very, very unpleasant. And then there's a third scenario that could happen, which is that the era of some Ayatollahs and Islamism and some kind of fanatical Islamism ends, the regime erodes, and it basically turns into some kind of military junta, a government of military rule with Islamic elements. For example, the army or the Revolutionary Guards could take over power, and after all, lately the Revolutionary Guards pretty much already have that power. So this is the third and most likely scenario, that a new form of totalitarianism will emerge in Iran based on Islam, but it won't be as strict and it won't be in the form of spiritual leaders, but rather in the form of military leaders. So, yeah, these are the three scenarios. For me, the most likely is the last one, meaning the rule of an Islamic military junta. And at that point, of course, people who celebrate the fall of Khamenei and people who say that Trump is bringing freedom are, of course, mistaken, because this doesn't bring any freedom. It has nothing to do with freedom. The only thing it has to do with is that there will be a dictatorship that is loyal to the United States. Actually, it's similar to what we can currently see in Venezuela, where the old regime, the one that shot people, expelled people, beat people, and all those things, didn't disappear anywhere. It just became more loyal to the United States because the hardest core, those who didn't want to negotiate with the United States, got scared by the military action. Maduro was kidnapped, all these things happened, but the regime, the harsh regime that suppresses the opposition, remained there. As for that opposition leader, the one who gave Donald Trump the Nobel Peace Prize, what happened to her? Right, where is the installation of a democratically elected president? Nowhere. Americans are simply dealing with a dictator, so in this regard, I expect a similar development in Iran, where there will simply be no freedom, no democracy, nothing. In fact, in Iran, there isn't even a proper opposition with any kind of leader. So there will just be a dictatorship that's loyal to the United States. That's all. Any talk of freedom is pointless, premature, and completely foolish. There's no reason to celebrate with the Iranian people, because the Iranian people will continue to face only oppression, 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 and more oppression. So that's how it is, yeah. I would wish it for them. I would celebrate with them if I didn't know what their future holds. So that's it, ladies and gentlemen. Write in the comments what you think about this, because if you're optimistic, you seem rather naive to me. Yeah. Support the content. Have a great day, and bye for now.